Michael Thompson, a 42-year-old retired Marine and electrical contractor, thought his biggest worry was getting his 12-year-old daughter Emma to soccer practice on time. Then Janet Richardson knocked on his door at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, demanding he remove the American flag he'd proudly displayed for his country. What happened next will make you question everything you know about your own neighborhood. Before you hear this story, ask yourself, do you really know your HOA rules? This happened just 8 months ago in Meadowbrook Heights, a quiet suburb outside Phoenix. The family involved, they're still living there, and that flag is still flying. This story will change how you look at every HOA letter in your mailbox. Michael had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earning a Purple Heart after an IED explosion. Left him with a permanent limp and ringing in his ears that never quite went away. But he considered himself one of the lucky ones. He came home to his wife Sarah, a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and their daughter Emma, whose bright smile could light up his darkest days. After years of military housing and deployments, buying their first home in Meadowbrook Heights felt like the American dream finally within reach. The neighborhood was everything they'd hoped for. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained sidewalks, and neighbors who waved from their perfectly manicured lawns. Sarah loved how safe Emma felt riding her bike to visit friends. Mike appreciated the community pool where Emma had learned to swim, and the little park where families gathered for impromptu barbecues on summer evenings. The HOA fees seemed reasonable for the amenities, and the rules appeared straightforward. Keep your lawn neat, park in your driveway, maintain your home's appearance. For 2 years the Thompsons had been model residents. Mike's military discipline showed in their immaculate landscaping. Sarah organized neighborhood block parties. Emma had become fast friends with kids throughout the development. They'd found their place, their community, their slice of suburban peace. That peace shattered on Memorial Day weekend when Mike decided to honor his fallen brothers with a simple gesture. He installed a modest flagpole in his front yard, 3 feet tall, properly secured, flying a crisp American flag that caught the morning breeze with quiet dignity. Sarah had watched from their kitchen window as Mike stood at attention for a moment, his hand over his heart, lost in memories of friends who never made it home. The flag meant everything to Michael. It represented Lance Corporal Rodriguez, who died in his arms during that IED attack. It honored Sergeant Davis, whose convoy had hit a roadside bomb 2 weeks before coming home to meet his newborn son. It flew for every Gold Star family who'd sacrificed more than most people could imagine. For Mike, that flag wasn't decoration. It was a sacred memorial, a daily reminder of the price of freedom, a promise to never forget. For 5 peaceful days, the flag waved gently in the desert breeze. Neighbors smiled and nodded approvingly. Mrs. Martinez from next door had even stopped by to thank Mike for his service, tears in her elderly eyes as she shared that her late husband had served in Vietnam. Emma had asked her father to explain the flag's meaning, and Mike had knelt beside her, describing how each star represented a state, how the stripes honored the original colonies, how the colors symbolized valor, purity, and justice. Then Janet Richardson appeared at their front door. Janet had been HOA president for 6 years, a position she'd seized after retiring from her job as a high school vice principal. At 63, she'd found her life's purpose in maintaining Meadowbrook Heights property values through strict adherence to community standards. Her own home was a testament to HOA perfection: beige stucco with approved desert landscaping, regulation mailbox, and not a single blade of grass out of place. She drove slowly through the neighborhood each morning with a notepad, documenting violations like a prosecuting attorney building cases. What residents didn't realize was how desperately Janet needed this role. After 30 years of controlling teenagers, retirement had left her feeling invisible, irrelevant. The HOA presidency gave her authority again, respect, a reason to matter. Every rule enforced was validation of her importance. Every violation corrected proved her value to the community. When Janet knocked on Mike's door that Tuesday morning, her smile was tight and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I'm afraid we have a small issue to discuss regarding your recent landscape addition." Mike had been loading his work truck, preparing for a job installing electrical systems in a new office building downtown. His tool belt hung from his waist, work boots laced tight, ready for another day of honest labor that helped support his family. He'd been humming an old Marine cadence, feeling good about the day ahead. "I'm sorry, what landscape addition?" Mike asked, genuinely confused. "The flagpole you installed without HOA approval," Janet replied, consulting her. clipboard with the efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. According to our covenants, conditions and restrictions, Section 7.3, any exterior modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Mike felt his stomach drop. Ma'am, it's just an American flag, 3 feet tall, in my own front yard. I understand your patriotic intentions, Mr. Thompson, and we certainly appreciate your military service. However, rules are rules. The flag creates visual clutter that could impact property values. You have 7 days to remove it and submit a formal application if you wish to pursue approval. The words hit Mike like a physical blow. Visual clutter. His memorial to fallen Marines, his symbol of everything he'd fought to defend, reduced to visual clutter. His hands began to shake. Not with fear, but with the kind of controlled rage that had kept him alive in combat. Mrs. Richardson, with all due respect, this is the flag of the United States of America. I served 3 tours defending that flag. Are you seriously telling me I can't fly it in my own yard? Janet's smile never wavered, but her voice grew sharper. I'm telling you that homeowner association rules apply to everyone equally, regardless of their background, no exceptions. 7 days, Mr. Thompson. As Janet walked back to her white sedan, Mike stood in his doorway feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Sarah appeared beside him, having overheard the conversation. She took his hand, feeling the tremor of suppressed emotion. What kind of place have we moved to? Sarah whispered. That evening, Mike sat at his kitchen table with the HOA covenants spread before him, reading by lamplight while Sarah helped Emma with homework. His paralegal training from before his electrical career kicked in as he searched for loopholes, exceptions, anything that might protect his right to honor his country. Section 7.3 was maddeningly vague. No exterior modifications, additions or alterations shall be made without prior written approval. But what constituted a modification? Was a flag different from a garden gnome or decorative rock? The document mentioned maintaining aesthetic harmony and property value protection, but offered no specific guidelines about patriotic displays. More troubling, Mike found no mention of flags anywhere in the restrictions. It was as if the founders of Meadowbrook Heights had never considered that American veterans might want to honor their country. The oversight felt deliberate, a way to give the HOA broad discretionary power over residents' expressions. Dad, why can't we keep our flag? Emma asked, during dinner, her 12-year-old mind struggling to understand adult complications. Mike looked at his daughter's innocent face, remembering all the reasons he'd served. Some people think rules are more important than what the flag represents, sweetheart. But didn't you fight for the flag? I fought for what it stands for. Freedom. The right to live how we choose. The idea that in America, people can express their beliefs without fear. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Mike's hand. So what do we do? Mike stared out their window at the flag, now seeming to wave defiantly in the evening breeze. We fight back. But we do it the right way. The next morning, Mike began his research campaign. He contacted the Freedom Defense Foundation, a legal organization that specialized in constitutional rights cases. He researched federal and state laws protecting flag display. He discovered the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, federal legislation that limited HOA restrictions on patriotic symbols. What Mike learned made his blood boil. The federal law specifically prevented HOAs from prohibiting American flag displays, with reasonable restrictions on size and location. Janet either didn't know the law, or was hoping Mike didn't know it. Armed with legal precedent, Mike drafted a respectful but firm letter to the HOA board, citing federal statutes and requesting a formal hearing. He kept copies of everything, photographed his flag installation from multiple angles, and documented the exact dimensions and placement. His military precision served him well in building an evidence file. But Janet Richardson wasn't finished with her campaign. On Friday, exactly 7 days after her initial visit, a certified letter arrived with escalating consequences. Final notice: failure to comply within 48 hours will result in daily fines of $50, increasing to $100 per day after 14 days of non-compliance. Liens may be placed on property for unpaid fines. Sarah read the letter with growing horror. Mike, we can't afford hundreds of dollars in daily fines. Emma's orthodontist alone costs us $300 a month. Your truck payment is due next week. Mike felt the walls closing in. They'd stretched their budget to buy this house, taking on a 30-year mortgage that left little room for unexpected expenses. His electrical contracting work provided steady income, but not enough to absorb mounting HOA fines without serious sacrifice. That night, Mike stood in his yard staring at the flag, wrestling with an impossible choice. Keep his memorial to fallen friends and risk financial ruin for his family, or surrender to bullying and betray everything he'd sworn to defend. The flag snapped in a sudden gust of wind, and Mike made his decision. Saturday morning brought unexpected support. Mrs. Martinez appeared at Mike's door carrying a manila folder thick with documents. At 78, Dorothy Martinez had lived in Meadowbrook Heights longer than anyone, purchasing her home when the development was barely finished. "I've been watching this nonsense with your flag," she said, settling into Mike's kitchen chair with the determination of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of injustice. "Janet Richardson is drunk on power, and it's time someone stopped her." Dorothy opened her folder, revealing years of HOA correspondence, meeting minutes, and violation notices. "I've been documenting Janet's selective enforcement for 3 years. Look at this." The evidence was damning. Photos showed dozens of rule violations throughout the neighborhood that had been ignored. Garden decorations, unauthorized paint colors, oversized mailboxes, decorative fencing. But only certain residents received violation notices, specifically those who did ever challenged Janet's authority or failed to support her re-election. "Mrs. Martinez, this is incredible. Why haven't you brought this up before?" Dorothy's eyes flashed with old anger. "Because I'm a 78-year-old widow, and nobody listens to old ladies complaining about unfair treatment. But you're different. You're a veteran, a man, someone people respect. If you fight this, I'll support you every step of the way." Together, they developed a strategy. Mike would continue his legal challenge, while Dorothy quietly recruited other dissatisfied residents. They would document every violation, attend every board meeting, and build a coalition of homeowners tired of Janet's authoritarian leadership. But Janet had strategies of her own. Monday morning brought escalation. Mike arrived home from work to find Sarah crying at their kitchen table, Emma's homework forgotten beside her. In her hands was another certified letter, this one threatening immediate legal action and property liens. "Mike, she's going to take our house," Sarah whispered. "The fines are accumulating daily. We're already at $350, and it's only been a week." The financial pressure was crushing. Mike had built his post-military life on careful budgeting, planning, and responsibility to his family. The mounting fines threatened everything they'd worked for. His truck payment was due. Emma needed new soccer cleats. Sarah's car registration was coming up. Every dollar mattered in their tightly managed household. That evening, Mike walked through his neighborhood with new eyes, seeing details he'd previously missed. 3 houses down, Bob Williams flew a Michigan State University flag from his porch. Clearly visible, clearly unauthorized. 2 streets over, the Patterson family had installed decorative garden stepping stones without HOA approval. The Morrison house displayed a welcome friends sign that violated the same exterior modification rules being used against Mike's flag. The hypocrisy was staggering. Janet's selective enforcement wasn't about rules or property values. It was about power, control, and personal vendettas. Mike's research had revealed something else interesting about Bob Williams, the HOA treasurer who'd voted to fine Mike at the emergency board meeting. Bob was Janet's closest ally, a retired insurance adjuster who'd moved to Arizona from Michigan 5 years earlier. He consistently supported Janet's enforcement actions, never questioning her selective application of rules. Wednesday evening, Mike conducted a careful reconnaissance of Bob's property. The Michigan state flag flew proudly from a decorative bracket attached to Bob's front porch, a clear violation of the same exterior modification rules being used to persecute Mike. But more interesting was the timing. Utility records showed Bob had installed his flag bracket in March, 2 months before Mike's Memorial Day flag display. The evidence was perfect. Bob Williams had been flying an unauthorized flag for months, with Janet's full knowledge, while Mike faced escalating fines for honoring fallen Marines. Thursday night, Mike attended the monthly HOA board meeting armed with his evidence file. Legal research and righteous anger carefully controlled by military discipline. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige building that matched the aesthetic uniformity Janet demanded throughout Meadowbrook Heights. About 30 residents attended, most looking bored or resigned to whatever decisions the 5-person board would impose. Janet sat at the head of a folding table, flanked by Bob Williams and 3 other board members who rarely spoke or challenged her leadership. "New business," Janet announced after routine financial reports. We have an ongoing violation issue with Mr. Thompson's unauthorized flag display." Mike stood up, feeling the weight of attention from his neighbors. "Mrs. Richardson, I'd like to address the board regarding this matter." "Mr. Thompson, you're welcome to speak, but our position remains unchanged. Rules apply equally to everyone." "That's exactly what I want to discuss," Mike replied, opening his evidence folder. "I've researched the Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, which specifically protects homeowners' rights to display the American flag. Your restrictions appear to violate federal law." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Several residents leaned forward, interested in the legal challenge. Janet's smile tightened. "Mr. Thompson, we've consulted with our attorney, and our covenants are legally sound. Your flag display remains in violation. Then perhaps you can explain why Bob Williams has been flying a Michigan state flag for 3 months without any violation notices." The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to Bob, whose face flushed red as he stammered for a response. That's completely different. It's a small decorative flag." Mike pulled out photographs. "These images show Mr. Williams's flag is actually larger than mine and mounted with hardware that clearly violates the same exterior modification rules. Yet he's faced no fines, no threats, no demands for removal. The evidence was undeniable. Bob's Michigan state flag was visible in multiple photos, clearly larger than Mike's American flag, mounted with obviously unauthorized hardware. The hypocrisy couldn't be explained away. Janet tried to regain control. "Mr. Williams' situation will be addressed separately. Your violation remains our immediate concern." "No, Mrs. Richardson. This proves your selective enforcement. You're violating my constitutional rights, while allowing board members to break the same rules. This isn't about aesthetics or property values, it's about personal bias and abuse of power." For the first time in 6 years, Janet Richardson faced open rebellion in her own board meeting. Residents who'd been silent for years began asking questions, demanding answers, challenging the arbitrary nature of rule enforcement. Mrs. Martinez stood up, her 78-year-old voice carrying surprising strength. "I've lived here longer than anyone, and I'm tired of watching good people get bullied while Janet's friends do whatever they want. Mike Thompson served our country with honor. The least we can do is let him fly the flag he fought for." Other voices joined in. The Pattersons, who'd received violation notices for their garden stones while Bob's flag flew unbothered. The Johnsons, who'd been fined for parking their RV in their driveway for 1 weekend while board members violated multiple ongoing violations. The Garcias, who'd been threatened with liens over a children's playhouse, while Janet ignored unauthorized modifications throughout the neighborhood. The meeting dissolved into chaos as years of suppressed frustration erupted. Janet attempted to maintain order, but the democratic uprising had begun. Residents demanded accountability, equal enforcement, and an end to the authoritarian leadership that had characterized Janet's tenure. Mike felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced since his military days: the power of leading people toward justice, of standing up for principles that mattered more than personal comfort. But Janet Richardson wasn't finished fighting. The next morning brought retaliation swift and vicious. Mike found his truck tires slashed, deep cuts that would require complete replacement. His mailbox had been vandalized with spray paint. Someone had scattered trash across his carefully maintained lawn. Sarah discovered the damage first, calling Mike at work with a voice shaking with fear and anger. "Mike, they're trying to intimidate us. What if Emma had been outside when this happened?" The escalation terrified Mike. He'd faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, but this was different. His family was being targeted in what should have been the safety of their own neighborhood. The people he'd served to protect were now the ones threatening his loved ones. Mike filed police reports, installed security cameras, and began documenting everything with military precision. But he also made a decision that would change everything. Friday evening, Mike organized a neighborhood meeting independent of the HOA board. He sent flyers to every house, explaining the constitutional issues at stake, and inviting residents to discuss fair enforcement of community rules. 43 people showed up, the largest neighborhood gathering in Meadowbrook Heights history. They met in Mike's backyard, sitting in folding chairs borrowed from 6 different families, united by shared frustration with Janet's authoritarian leadership. Mrs. Martinez presented her documentation of selective enforcement. The Pattersons shared their harassment over garden decorations. The Johnsons explained how they'd been intimidated into removing their children's basketball hoop while violations throughout the neighborhood went ignored. But the most powerful moment came when Mike stood beside his flagpole, the American flag rippling gently in the evening breeze, and spoke about what that symbol meant to him and to the community. "This flag represents everything I fought for overseas," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd. "Freedom of expression, equal treatment under law, the right to live with dignity in our own homes. When we allow bullies to silence patriotic expression through selective, rule enforcement, we betray the very principles this flag represents." He paused, looking at his neighbors. Hard-working families who'd invested their dreams in this community, parents raising children who deserved to understand American values, elderly residents who'd spent lifetimes supporting the freedoms Mike had defended. "I'm not asking you to support me personally. I'm asking you to support the idea that rules should apply equally to everyone, that homeowners deserve fair treatment, and that constitutional rights matter more than one person's desire for control." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in years, Meadowbrook Heights residents felt empowered to challenge the arbitrary authority that had dominated their community. They organized. They strategized. They united. Within a week, Mike had documented 17 ongoing violations throughout the neighborhood that had been ignored while he faced escalating fines. Mrs. Martinez had recruited 12 residents willing to testify about selective enforcement. The Pattersons had researched their legal options. The community had transformed from passive victims into active defenders of their rights. The breakthrough came when Mike discovered Janet's own violation. While researching property records, Mike found that Janet had installed a decorative water fountain in her backyard without HOA approval, a clear violation of the same exterior modification rules being used to persecute his flag display. The fountain had been installed 3 years earlier, was visible from the street, and had never been submitted for architectural review. The hypocrisy was complete. The HOA president, who'd spent months threatening Mike with liens and legal action over a 3-foot flagpole, had been violating the exact same rules for years. Mike presented this evidence at the next board meeting, now attended by over 50 residents demanding accountability. The community center was packed, with people standing along the walls, unified in their determination to end Janet's selective enforcement. "Mrs. Richardson," Mike said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of someone who'd led Marines in combat, "you've installed an unauthorized water fountain. That violates the same exterior modification rules you've used to fine me over $800. When will you be removing your violation and paying the appropriate penalties?" Janet's face went white, then red, then white again. She stammered explanations about aesthetic improvements and property value enhancement, but her words rang hollow in a room full of residents who'd endured months of arbitrary enforcement. "Furthermore," Mike continued, "I've identified 17 ongoing violations throughout this neighborhood that have been ignored while my constitutional right to display the American flag has been attacked. This selective enforcement proves personal bias and abuse of power." The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, documentation, dates, measurements. Mike's military training had prepared him for this campaign, and he'd executed it with precision that left no room for denial. Bob Williams tried to defend Janet, but his own Michigan state flag violation undermined any credibility he might have had. The other board members, who'd been rubber-stamping Janet's decisions for years, suddenly found voices to distance themselves from her authoritarian leadership. The meeting ended with a motion of no confidence in Janet's leadership, a demand for her resignation, and a vote to immediately suspend all violation enforcement pending a comprehensive review of selective application. Janet Richardson's 6-year reign of HOA tyranny was over. The aftermath brought swift changes. Janet resigned in humiliation, followed shortly by Bob Williams and 2 other board members who'd enabled her selective enforcement. New elections brought residents committed to fair, transparent, and constitutional governance. Mike's flag was officially recognized as a protected display under federal law. The HOA adopted new policies requiring equal enforcement of all rules, with documentation and justification for every violation notice. A residents' rights committee was established to prevent future abuse of authority. But the most important victory was personal. Mike had discovered strength he'd forgotten he possessed, not the physical courage that had carried him through Afghanistan, but the moral courage to stand up for principles in his own community. He'd protected his family, his flag, and his neighbors' rights through determination and leadership that honored his military service. Sarah watched her husband with renewed respect as he worked in their yard beneath the American flag that now flew with legal protection. Emma asked fewer questions about why adults sometimes do stupid things, having watched her father demonstrate that good people could stand up to bullies and win. Mrs. Martinez became the new HOA president, bringing decades of wisdom and fairness to community leadership. The Pattersons were able to keep their garden decorations. The Johnsons reinstalled their children's basketball hoop. Neighbors who'd been afraid to personalize their homes began expressing themselves within reasonable guidelines. The flag still flies in Mike Thompson's front yard, a symbol of constitutional rights protected through community action. Visitors to Meadowbrook Heights often comment on how friendly the neighborhood seems, how neighbors actually talk to each other, how the community feels like a place where families can thrive. Mike never talks much about his military service, but residents who know the story understand that his greatest victory wasn't won overseas. It was won right here at home, defending the freedoms that flag represents, against enemies who'd forgotten what America really means. On Memorial Day weekend, 8 months after Janet Richardson first knocked on his door demanding he remove his flag, Mike stood in his front yard with Sarah and Emma, surrounded by neighbors who'd gathered for a small ceremony honoring local veterans. The flag snapped crisp and proud in the desert breeze, a reminder that constitutional rights are only as strong as the citizens willing to defend them. Emma looked up at her father with pride in her eyes. "Dad, I'm glad you didn't take down our flag." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The American flag still flies in Meadowbrook Heights, protected by federal law, community support, and one Marine veteran who remembered that serving his country didn't end when he came home. It continued every day he stood up for the principles that flag represents. In the neighborhood where his family had found their place in the American dream,